Now, one of the criticisms against the CAA is that by privileging certain religions over others, with regard to the question of citizenship, it departs from the principle of secularism, which is part of the Constitution, a basic value, and indeed is found in the preamble, the first few words of the preamble. Now, in response to this, certain people have argued that the word secular was not part of the original preamble and was rammed through into the constitution by Indira Gandhi during the emergency through the notorious 42nd Amendment. So, what is the place of secularism in the constitution? Now, it's absolutely true that the original preamble did not have the words socialist or secular, and that Indira Gandhi did actually insert these words at a time at which there was effectively no opposition and the country was under emergency. But a few things need to be noted here. The first is that after the fall of Indira Gandhi, through the 43rd and 44th Amendments, the Janata Party actually undid much of the constitutional wreckage that Indira Gandhi had caused. But they chose to leave certain things standing. And one of those was the insertion of secular into the preamble. And the reason for this, as I shall explain shortly, was that there was never any dispute about the fact that the Indian constitution intends to establish a secular state. And we'll come to that in a moment. But also keep in mind, interestingly, that one thing that the Janata Party did actually remove from the constitution, which was Indira Gandhi's creation, was a prohibition on anti-national activities. So Indira Gandhi actually, through the 42nd Amendment, introduced a clause that allowed Parliament to pass any law banning anti-national activities and stated that any such law could not be challenged on fundamental rights grounds. And the Janata Party rightly removed that. So if there's any phrase that should be completely rejected, that's the complete legacy of Indira Gandhi's tenure, it's the word anti-national. But let's come back to secularism and secular. Now, even though the word secular was not part of the original preamble, the secular character of the Indian constitution is evident through a number of provisions in the fundamental rights chapter. It's evident in the provision that prohibits the state from discriminating against citizens on the grounds of religion. It's evident in the guarantee to freedom of religion. It's evident in the constitutional clause that prohibits the government from taxing you to support any particular religion, and so on. So, secularism pervades the Indian Constitution's fundamental rights chapter. And now you may well ask that if that's the case, then why isn't it part of the preamble, the original preamble? Why did the original preamble only say that India is a sovereign democratic republic? And the reason for that, in my view, is that there was never any dispute over secularism. The framers were all united in the assumption that India was going to be a secular state. And so there was never any need felt to spell it out in so many terms in the preamble. And that is evident by a close study of the Constituent Assembly debates, because throughout the debates, there is controversy over what the role of minority rights are in a secular state, and so on. But there's never any doubt that the state will be secular. And in fact, the very rejection of separate electorates on religious lines, which was such a part of the pre independence colonial era, was on the basis that in a secular state, there can be no reservations on the grounds of religion in politics. And that was the entire basis why electorates were not made separate on religious grounds. Now, this can be also seen from a number of very clear statements made by very senior members of the Constituent Assembly. So let's come to a man called Sardar Patel. So remember, this is not, in the words of Tejasvi Surya today, a namby-pamby Nehru. This is Patel, the famous Patel. And he says in responding to the Akali Dal with respect to separate electorates, he says that I hope the House, that's the Assembly, will feel proud that we are able to bring about almost unanimity in removing the past blots in our constitution and to lay with the grace of God and with the blessings of the Almighty the foundations of a true secular democratic state where everybody has an equal chance and then everybody cheers. This is Sardar Patel. Aladi Krishnaswamy Iyer, a very senior lawyer and one of, again, the foremost draftspeople of the Constitution, he says in the Assembly, we are plighted to the principles of a secular state. We may make a distinction between people who have voluntarily and deliberately chosen another country as their home and those who want to retain their connection with this country. But we cannot, on any racial or religious or other grounds, make a distinction between one kind of person and another, or one sect of person and another sect of persons, having regard to our commitments and the formulation of our policy on various occasions. And interestingly, Iyer is talking specifically in the context of citizenship. This is a debate on citizenship in the assembly, and he's saying that religion cannot be made the basis of citizenship claims because that would be counter to a secular state. Therefore, this whole argument that the word secular was not part of the original preamble is a complete red herring because various constitutional provisions set out secularism as a value, and indeed the framers of the constitution were perfectly aware that they were setting up a secular state where claims of religion could not affect one's status in public life. The Indian constitution commits us to what is often called civic nationalism. In other words, the idea that what makes us Indians is our commitment to a shared set of values in the constitution, values of freedom, of equality, of inclusion, of diversity, of fraternity, and so on. And that is the basis on which we are Indians under the constitution. And that's why secularism is and continues to be an integral part of the constitutional republic.